Hello everyone, I am Daljeet. I am going to deliver a presentation on data modeling and entity relationship model. Firstly, I would like to talk about the overview of database. Like what is database? A database is collection of information that is organized so that it can easily be accessed, managed and updated. To access information from a database, you need a database management system, which is basically a collection of programs or software tools that makes it possible to organize data in a database. Now, how database relates to information system? Information system is also an organized system which is used for collection, storage and organization of information, and database is one of the component of the information system. Now, what is the role of database administrator in RDBMS? A DBA directs or performs all activities related to maintaining a successful database environment. Here are the responsibilities of database administrator. It is the DBA's job to decide exactly what information is to be held in the database. He is responsible to ensure that the information or data the user requires is available, and he provides the authentication and authorization checks so that no malicious users can access the database and it must remain protected. Now, what is data modeling and entity relationship model? Data. Data is raw facts and figures. It is the name given to basic facts and entities. Data modeling. It is the first step in the creation of database. It is representation of content, relationship and constraint of data. Entity. Entity is some unit of data such as places, person, things which have relevance to database. Relationship tells how entities are related to each other. Entities have relationship with other entities and are connected to each other in relationships. Entity relationship model. It is graphical representation of entities and their relationship to each other in order to create a database. The purpose of this chapter is to create a data model because the requirements are not sufficient. So some diagrammatic representation is needed for the database development, which transform requirements into data model, and entity relationship model is one of the technique of the data model. Stages of database development. Basically, there are three stages of database development. During the requirement analysis stage, system users are interviewed and sample forms, reports, queries and description of update activities are obtained. These system requirements are used to create a data model as a part of the requirement analysis stage. During the component design stage, the data model is transformed into a database design. Such a design consists of tables, relationship and constraints. In the implementation stage, the actual database is implemented. Now the entity relationship model. There are the four elements of entity relationship model. An entity is any object in the system that we want to model and store information about. Entities have attributes that describe the entity characteristics and they have a data type and properties. Identifiers identify a particular instance in the entity class, and entities are associated with one another in a relationship. Relationship degree. A relationship class can involve many entity classes. The number of entity classes in the relationship is known as the degree of relationship. Degree 2 is a binary relationship and degree 3 is a ternary relationship. This chapter belongs to design phase, in which we just make a graphical model of database before the actual implementation of or actual design. We just define constraint, entities and relationship graphically. This chapter relates to this phase because entity relationship model is one of the techniques to create a data model. First, the data model is developed from system requirements and then it converts into database design, which is the development or implementation phase. Types of binary relationship. A relationship where two entities are participating is called a binary relationship. There are three types. In one-to-one, one instance of an entity is related to one instance of another entity. One-to-many, one instance of an entity is related to many instances of another entity. And in many-to-many, many instances of an entity is related to many instances of another entity. Here is the example of these three relationships. Cardinality. Cardinality is the number of entity instances participating in a relationship. Maximum cardinality. It is the maximum number of entity instances that may participate in a relationship instance. But the minimum number of entity instances that must participate in a relationship instance is the minimum cardinality. Entity relationship diagrams and types. An entity relationship model is a graphical representation of entities and their relationship to each other. Here are the two types of entity relationship diagram. One is the ER model version and second is the Crowfoot's version. Entity classes are shown by rectangles, but the relationship are shown by diamonds. The maximum cardinality is shown inside the diamond, while the minimum cardinality is shown by oval or hash mark next to the entity. The name of the entity is shown inside the rectangle, but the name of the relationship is shown near the diamond. Now, what is the weak entity? A weak entity is an entity that cannot exist in the database without the existence of another entity. Any entity that is not a weak entity is called a strong entity. ID-dependent weak entities. An ID-dependent weak entity is a weak entity that cannot exist without its parent entity. Now, here are the weak entity relationship. A relationship is called identifying relationship in which the weak entity is ID dependent and it is represented by a solid line. And if the weak entity is non-ID dependent, then the relationship between a strong entity and a weak entity is termed as non-identifying relationship and it is represented by a dashed line. Associative entity. Associative entity is used when there are attributes that are associated with the relationship between two entities rather than with either of the two entities themselves. A new entity is then created to link the two original entities and to hold the attributes. Here is the example of the associative entity. Subtype entity. A subtype entity is a special case of another entity called supertypes. Associative and subtypes both are the types of the weak entities. Now, what is discriminator? An attribute that determines which subtype is appropriate is called a discriminator. And the subtypes can be inclusive or exclusive. In inclusive, a supertype can relate to one or more subtypes. But in exclusive, a supertype relates to at most one subtypes. Subtypes entity identifiers. Supertypes and subtypes are connected with each other in a relationship called is-are relationship because a subtype is the same entity as the supertype. The identifier of a supertype and all of its subtype is the same attribute. Now, what is the recursive relationship? Any entity can have a relationship with itself is called a recursive relationship. Now, what are the input and the output for the ERD? System requirements are needed to create the data model which is used as an input, and a graphical model is developed in this phase which is used as the input for the implementation phase or design phase. The graphical representation of data model transforms into database design as an input, which is the actual development of the database. Analyst and designer are the key peoples. Analysts analyze the system, define requirements, and on the basis of these requirements, database design is developed and database is implemented. Database administrator make all decisions related to database. This chapter empowers me as a database developer because the concept that are discussed, like how to define entities, their relationship with each other, how to represent database graphically before actual development of database, what are the types of relationship that we can define between entities, are very important for creating a database. All these processes are very helpful for a database developer. As database developer, there are steps that are important to support a new information system development for an organization. Now, the key purpose. The key purpose of this chapter is to create a data model before the actual implementation of the database, in which we define entities, relationship and constraint which help database developer in creating a database. Now, the key terms. Binary relationship. It is the relationship when two entities are participating is called a binary relationship, and the cardinality is the number of entities that are participating in a relationship. ER diagram or entity relationship diagram is the graphical representation of entity and their relationship with each other. These are the key terms. This is all about the data modeling and entity relationship model. Thank you very much. Have a good day.